Any encouragement within our current administration and the new Health and Human Services Secretary, RFK, and what he's doing to help drive out some of these processed foods, ingredients, less subsidies for them, sugary things, and just to help clean up some of that supply chain?
Yeah, RFK is a hard character because he's doing some things that a lot of us have wanted for a long time, like removing artificial dyes from our food in the U.S. We don't know fully the extent of what are some of these, mostly petroleum derivatives. It mostly comes from the oil industry. A lot of our derivatives, even our sweeteners for things like sweet and low and stuff like that, a lot of those are oil derivatives. They come from oil and gas companies trying to figure out how to use all the leftover gunk that comes out of refining oil. And there's a lot of products we use from that process. It goes into our plastics that we're littered with across our country. It goes into a lot of things we use in laundry detergents and soaps and all kinds of stuff. A lot of it comes from oil and gas industry. And so a lot of these dyes and these other things we have being put into our food, a lot of this comes from petroleum refining. A lot of nations have now banned these substances because we don't need them. We have natural substances. You don't need a red dye you get from oil when you have beet juice and it's naturally red and it comes from a substance we've co-evolved with. And so there are a lot of substances, honestly, we just shouldn't have in our foods. We don't need them.
And many countries don't have.
That many countries don't
Canada,
have because
Europe.
they have really great regulation. Because scientists as well as citizens have argued we don't want this in our food until we know better. We want better scientific research before we spend decades allowing our children to eat it.
This podcast is brought to you by B Micro, a company I'm deeply passionate about because I founded it in 2018. It's USDA organic freeze-dried microgreens for everyday nutrition and detox. Sprinkle them on any meal or take them as a capsule to enjoy the many healthy benefits. Shop now at bmicro.farm. Use code STEVE15 to save.
And so I agree with that. I think we really should be doing the scientific research. And in some cases, there isn't enough research to say whether or not a substance can be harmful. In some other instances, there are some of these substances in our foods where it's like, it's questionable if we should have it or not. That's the Subway for a long time had this chemical in their bread. Forgetting offhand what the chemical substance, I'm sure your listeners will tell me later en masse, but basically the same thing we had in yoga mats. It's a very common plastic petroleum derivative, and it was being put in Subway's bread. Get rid of that. We don't need that. In a lot of cases, the reasons these other kinds of substances are used is because it's cheap and it saves someone at the very top of the company. The board members and the C-suite, they get to make a few $1,000,000 extra a year on top of the tens of millions or hundreds of millions they're already making by doing this. And so at the end of the day, it's not going to hurt their bottom line. Their family is still going to live lives of luxurious generational wealth, and yet the rest of us can actually be a little bit healthier and getting rid of some of that stuff. I agree entirely with that. But RFK Jr. is questionable in other places because he's also shared a lot of pseudoscience. He shared a lot of things that are not proactive, are actually very problematic for a lot of us in the sciences. And he shares a lot of misinformation. I think he has always cared about health. You go back to when his father unfortunately was assassinated. Even back then, his father was working on a lot of these topics in health and what we put in our foods. RFK certainly was part of that process and knew a lot about that as a young person. And now now he's an older man. I think he cares, but I think he's also highly misled in some places.
What places stand out most to you?
I think vaccination's a big one for me. Yes, there are concerns about the kinds of companies that are selling vaccines and that try to market vaccines exceedingly quickly. We should question, what else is in the vaccine? What are they doing? But that said, vaccine science is extremely sound. We've known about vaccination for a very long time, and it's been studied so much around the planet. And I think some of what RFK is sharing is very dangerous because vaccination has helped us to, if not eradicate, highly reduce some of the most infectious diseases that have ever come to our planet. And some of those diseases, many of those diseases in particular, target young children. Was impacted by one of these diseases as a child. If we allow ourselves to be so misled to hate vaccines, even though the science is in support of vaccination, it could lead us to a place where we see a resurgence in measles and polio or other diseases that could come around that we're not even ready for yet. And at the end of the day, the ones who will be hurt the most from that are children, especially children from the most disadvantaged populations. So generally speaking, it's the most marginalized communities who will be the most greatly impacted by a lack of vaccination in our society.
Now, is he anti all vaccines? Do you
So
know?
far, it seems, yeah.
Oh.
He seems very much against vaccination in general, given the statements he's made. Now, granted, he has come out most against the more recent mRNA vaccines. And I agree, the science, it was quick. We did that science exceedingly quickly, but it's also something that was in the works for a long time. People were thinking about, like, how can we do this? How can we create an mRNA vaccine that tells our bodies how to create the mRNAs themselves? It's ingenious. And we are at a place where...
Is that a vaccine or is that more like gene therapy?
Kind of both. Yeah, it's an interesting question. We usually use that word generally to talk about like intentional gene manipulation, using some kind of viral vector, things like that, which is what these vaccines are kind of doing. We don't tend to use gene therapy as a word to describe what these vaccines are, but I guess you could say that. It is telling our bodies how to produce the mRNAs themselves to make the products, the viral products that give us the immunity. And our cells are just so much better at doing that than actually the process of going through an immune response to viral particles themselves.
What about these companies that make the vaccines here in the U.S. and then they have some type of a blanket protection against any type of litigation against them?
Yeah, I mean, so, government regulation is an interesting thing. It has saved us so much historically. It also can be problematic. Well, I will give Elon Musk and these other corporations and these billionaires some credit in that in some places they're right. Sometimes government regulation, it's slow, it slows down progress, it slows down good engineering and science, but it's there for a reason. It's there to make sure these companies aren't dumping garbage into our food or into our medications with us not knowing what it is. We've had this issue with China for some time now. China doesn't have as much government regulation, and so there have been a lot of products that's been created in China, sent to other places like the U.S., that have been faulty or contained other materials they shouldn't. Great examples are when the dog food scare happened because Chinese companies were putting other things in dog food that dogs couldn't eat. Same thing for baby formula. There was a breakout of that some time back. It's also happened with drywall. With gypsum and drywall has gotten shipped around the world from these Chinese mines where the gypsum wasn't actually clean gypsum. It was contaminated with sulfur, which became hydrogen sulfide. Could leak out through getting wet and then corrode pipes, cause massive issues for plumbing in homes. Government regulation can help us to stop companies from doing that. It allows us to have some oversight of what these companies are doing, so we need that. And so I worry when we have companies that are given kind of, a blanket protection from a government to be allowed to do whatever they want. That's problematic, and that's scary for a lot of us. And it's part of why I think we need better regulation. But you have to realize, too, like not all those companies are in the U.S. A lot of these companies are headquartered in other countries. They might be producing a lot of stuff in the U.S., but right now some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies are not here. They are selling their drugs here because we pay more for them.
Graham, thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Anything else that you want to share with people?
I speak a lot, mostly online, but also at various places around the world. I'm going to New Zealand here soon, for instance, and I get to talk to a lot of people about astrobiology and alien life and things like plants, like how cool trees are and why there should be alien trees, and the history of plants in our biology and our history on Earth, as well as just the history of life as we know it on our planet. I would love for everyone, when they're going about their day, not just trying to find that moment between the stimulus and the response, to pause and reflect and again, think about, the value of what you're going to do before you do it. I also encourage everyone, if you can, and I know in some cases people are, they're facing insecurity in food and resource access. They're facing violence, and we need to help those people as much as we can. But I do hope that anyone who can find a moment in their day, in their week, in their month, just to think about, like, what if? What if aliens are out there? What if they're like us? What if they want to come talk?